Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today's album review is on Jesus and Mary Chain's debut album from 1985, Psychocandy. Um, hmm, how to start off this review? I think the first thing that comes to my mind, since I'm doing a video and people are going to watch it possibly, um, is that as I pull up my notes, I think some hardcore Jesus and Mary Chain fans might disagree with me. Well, I'm sure they will. Um, this is my least favorite album of their first five albums. Um, when I think of the overview of the, and it's not because this is a bad album at all. In fact, I think this is a pretty good album. Um, there's some things that draw it back for me, and besides the obvious of I think lack of quality of songs for the most part. Um, Talking about some of the good things, in some ways this is kind of like the ideal post punk sound combined with or ideal post punk sound of the mid '80s, and really the sort of the new rock and roll for the '80s, right? I mean, it's kind of like it does have kind of like a classic rock and roll riffs that they do. I'm not a huge rock and roll fan, but it almost sounds like a distorted, or not really distorted, but phased, not even phased out. Really, it's just really affected effects on on a Ramones sort of sound. Like there's a little bit of Jesus James that reminds me a lot of the Ramones, except for a little bit more rock and roll. Like so you listen to some Jesus and Mary Chain songs that are kind of upbeat, and you could easily they could easily go into rock and roll high school or I Want to Be Sedated, and then you'd be like, oh, these just kind of sound in the same ballpark, anyways. Um, there are some really good songs on here, no doubt. Just Like Heaven, I mean, just like just like Heaven, just like Honey is one of my favorite of theirs. It's probably one of their best songs, and that's how the album starts. I really like Cut Dead, the fifth track, and then I also really like Something Wrong, which is the 13th track. This is their most raw sounding album, in my opinion. It's kind of distorted a little bit. I don't know if you call it distorted. It's not phased out because it doesn't have a it's just kind of a post punk sound, I suppose. It's kind of has that kind of like echo, or I wouldn't even say it's like echo or even like a church like reverb, like it's just like it's almost like a not a good microphone placement. Like if you were miking the drums and you had like a microphone on the drum and the snare and the low snare and the high snare and the mid snare and the cymbals, and then you had overhead, and then you had one on the ride. Like that would just be miking up a drum kit in a post punk band way too hardcore. You could probably just put two overhead mics, and that's kind of how it seems like the post punk bands are recorded. Like there's really no stereo spectrum in the drums at all. You might get some occasional cymbals, some things like that, but for the most part, the drums could be mono, and you probably couldn't tell that much, unless they're doing some sort of tom drumming things, which some like Joy Division does. But like with this one, it's pretty much straight, kick. I'm not a drummer, so this is from so I'm not an expert, but it sounds to me like there isn't very much stereo spectrum in the drums, and then it sounds like for the most part it's just like a stereo feed, like they're recording it stereo. They're not really like bringing up the bass drum and then like mixing those. They sound like it's an overhead microphone set up to where it just kind of catches it all, and because of that, it's kind of put in the background a little bit, and it drives the rhythm, of course, and it drives the song, but it's not necessarily the most important part of the sound, and not necessarily up front like the vocals are, or maybe even the distorted sort of echo guitar, you know what I mean, or even some of the sound effects. It seems like even some of the bass lines are stronger than the drums. That's kind of just the sound of post punk. In this one, though, I feel like the aggressive haziness to the sound is almost done too much. It's and not like over the course of a bunch of songs throughout the album. It's just at times it becomes almost if you're playing it loud, like it almost hurts your ears. Like I can think of like track number 2, "The Living Dead," 6 in a hole. Um, the last track, "It's So Hard." Like those tracks are almost like hurting your ears when if you're playing it like medium to loud. It's just really tight. I mean, really not really tight. Really loud. Um, I don't know, and I'm not saying that because I'm 48 years old. And I'm getting old. Like it's not the most pleasant. When you're listening. You know what I mean? It's like it's I get the punk, post punk feel and you know Jesus and Mary Chain have always been kind of like f everything else in their own kind of British way, do what they want, and which is all part of the punk attitude and stuff like that. I get it, but it's just there's really no other bands that I can say where it kind of gets to the level of this album does on certain tracks with post punk, where it becomes almost like it's just almost abrasively too loud, and it's really not done in an aggressive way. It's partly probably by accident that they're just doing so many things with the effects in the studio and stuff like that they don't really. They're like, oh well, that's how it is. It's pretty aggressive, but let's roll with it. It's different, you know. I think with Jesus and Mary Chain too, when you think about the singer, the lyrics and the vocals they're all fine. They're all good. Nothing, you know. I think the slower songs resonate more so with me than the. I wouldn't say the more driving songs, because if I had to measure how many, let's say I did a ranking of my favorite songs of Jesus Mary Chain, there'd probably be 6 that were like heavy driving, and like 4 that were like sort of like ballads, like just like Honey, right, or April Skies on the next album, But so it's not like I don't like that sound as much, but I think I do prefer them in their kind of ballad, kind of more mellow. Or although you think like Head On, which is one of their best driving songs, it's perfect in its own way too. But some of the really more aggressive ones, the faster ones, like this album has, I tend to not really like that. Like it in that vein. Like I'm just trying to think. Like You Trip Me Up and My Little Underground, they just don't really do too much for me. The Living Edge doesn't really do too much for me. I think the novelty kind of wears off. This is, we're coming on 40 years later. The novelty kind of wears off a little bit on the aggressiveness of the sound, and you just want to like hear it. So take it for a grain of salt with that. But I feel like it's a little too heavy. I appreciate the rawness of the album, and what they're trying to do with it, but I get it. If you were around for Jesus and Mary Chain when this album came out, you probably loved it. Just like most people when they first heard of Jesus and Mary Chain. My first album that I heard was Darklands, so Darklands is my favorite. So I get it. Like, if you were around for this album, I can see how you probably think this is your favorite. It's the most raw. It's the most true to them. Probably like most artists' first album is the most, I think, cherished and many times anyways, most cherished and most true and most true to their sound and what they represent, right? Just probably in their lyrics and how they present themselves and everything is probably their most true to form, right? But it's not always, like Cure. The Cure is a good example. Like, is Blood Flowers a better album than pornography? You could make an argument that it is. Musicmanship, their songwriting, the songs, right? But pornography has the sound, right? It has the aggressiveness. It has the way it was recorded. It's you know what I mean. So like the vintage sound sometimes trumps the better sometimes even the better recorded, better version of that band. Obviously, Robert Smith and everybody in the Cure has got that. Well, I guess only Robert Smith and Simon Gallup was from pornography time, but obviously they've gotten better in 40 years, or I guess at that time it was 20 years since Bloodflowers. So obviously they've gotten better, with their instruments and stuff like that. So so there's an argument to be made, but there's also an argument to be made that the vintage sound will always trump the later albums, and that's kind of the thing here. So I get it that most people would probably think this might be the best album, but I think Automatic, or actually even Honey's Dead and Automatic are tighter, But I really like Darklands. I think it has the kind of best of both worlds. It's the more polished than this one. Excuse me. Not as polished as the next two, but it's still got a combination of the raw. Um, so when I think of the other opportunities on the album, 14 songs is a lot to digest. Maybe if they tighten it up to 10 to 12 songs and lose a couple of tracks and have a stronger album, I'm sure that could have been done. Um, I'm looking at my notes here. Like you kind of think them again. You kind of think them like a harder, like a not really like a punk band, but you kind of think of like a rock and roll punk band or a post punk band, whatever you think it is. But you generally kind of think of them as the more driving songs, right? Those are the more popular ones. But then if you're like a Jesus Mary Chain, you kind of like the more melodic ones, or maybe slower ones, like I do. I don't know if everybody's like that, but um, for me, that's their better sound of the two. Although I think they can do both well. But in this album, there's really only Just Like Honey is the only track, and it happens to be the best one on the album. I think if you ask 10 people what's the best song on this, I'm sure 8 would say Just Like Honey. It's got to be the best track on the album. Um, and you can sort of hear them sort of evolve as the album goes on a little bit to a more driving direction. Um, when I look at the songs individually, Just Like Heaven's one of my favorite they've ever done. 4.25 stars. Living End is okay. It's 1.5 stars. Taste the Floor, 2 stars. The Hardest Walk is a little bit better, 2.75 stars. I do like Cut Dead, 3.25 stars. In a Hole, 2 stars. Taste of Cindy, 2.5. Never Understand, 2.5. Kind of has a classic punk sound. Inside Me, I do like that one's one of the better, harder ones. That's 3 stars for me. Sowing the Seeds is also 3 stars. I feel like the album takes a little bit of a hiccup here. My Little Underground and You Trip Me Up both don't do much for me. I got 1.25 stars. Again, I really like Something's Wrong, 3.25 stars. I think it's a nice change of pace. It sounds a little bit like Joy Division with the bass or a little kind of a Peter Hook kind of bass line. 3.25 stars. And then it ends with It's So Hard, which is different. This one's pretty good. I got 2.75 stars. Um, so yeah, I mean, if anybody drops off 3 or 4 songs off the album, you still get the gist of the album, the gist of their sound, and it would be a much tighter album for me. But I get it. A lot of songs are fairly short, and so they probably decided to add as many as 14 songs, but it becomes a little tedious, and not as far as like the length of the entire album, because it's still not a long album. It's just it kind of becomes there's maybe some of the songs start to sound the same, And even if you're a huge Jesus and the Mary Chain fan, you have to admit that a lot of their songs are kind of similar. Like some of the riffs are similar, some of the same driving. Some of their best songs ever are similar to each other. Um, I'm thinking like Head On sounds like one of the other popular ones. I'm blanking on the name. Um, but I do feel like they got better as they got into like Honey's Dead and Automatic and Darklands more so than this album. But yeah, those are kind of my overall thoughts on the album. I still think it's a pretty good album. Don't get me wrong. I rated it a 58 out of 100. I know that might seem low, but 60 when it reaches 60 for me, I feel like that's a good album. Yes, I think it's better than an okay album, but I'm kind of a little bit below good in saying it's a pretty good album. Um, so it's take it with a grain of salt. It's just my opinion. Um, I just I feel like they could have been a little bit more tighter and not been so aggressive on some of the sounds. Some of them are unlistenable, not because they're some are really okay songs, not that great of songs, and then some of them are a little bit annoying. So it's like half the album I would listen to, and then half the album I really wouldn't. Because yeah, some are overly aggressive, some sound like the other ones, some just aren't that great songs, and other thing is there's just better songs to listen to by them. So it's kind of a combination of all those. Um, but yeah, that's my overall thoughts on Jesus and the Mary Chain in their 1985 album Psychocandy. Um, yeah, so that's I think this is the 2012 reissue of Psychocandy. Um, but yeah, thanks so much for checking in with me and listening to this review. Um, just curious, what are your favorite three songs on the album? And what would you rate this out of 100? All right, thanks so much. Have a good day.